I'd like to welcome you to Capricorn Hill, a world-famous estate in the art world built by Max Ernst and Dorothea in Sedona in 1946, where they produced some of their most famous artworks in their career that are in 60, 70 museums around the world. Max Ernst was the founder of two movements, the Dada movement and the Surrealism movement, and a very important influence in the formation of the modern art movement in New York. This is the view of the gardens where Max's most famous sculpture stood directly under the tree right here. This is the Capricorn sculpture, which was produced in a series of 8 bronzes that are in famous museums around the world, including Center Pompidou, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and the Menil in Houston, and multiple other world-famous museums. These are the original gardens that Max and Dorothea built by hand. Dorothea said that they grew all their own food here, but they also grew a lot of flowers. This is a world-famous photograph by Henri Cartier-Bresson, which shows the first phase of the house in 1946, and you can see the same view out toward Oak Creek Canyon and Wilson Mountain as the photograph that he took at that time. It took me actually several years to determine exactly where Max's sculpture stood. There are 4 known fragments of the original sculpture that are in a museum in Berlin, and the rest of it remained here for decades, and it's a bit of an art mystery knowing what happened to it. But I found this photograph from 1952, which shows the house as Max built it and the placement of the sculpture under the tree right here. This is actually the very spot where the sculpture stood. Sedona is great because you can create a line of sight between a home and a landscape feature and know exactly where something stood. So here, as you look at the view of the landscape over the home and line up your line of sight points, you can see that the sculpture stood exactly right here. Max's studio was actually through the gate behind the house in the woods right here, and this is what the structure looked like. This photograph was taken in the 1960s. Actually, when Max and Dorothea first came to Sedona in 1943, and they rented a small cottage before moving here to build the house, Max wrote in his biographical notes that only 16 people lived in Sedona. So they were here when there was no one here. But by the time they built the house, many of their world-famous artist friends came to visit them in a short period of time. Dorothea complained there were 47 visitors in 44 days. This is where Max's studio stood, right in this area. Here's a photograph of Max building the studio. And here's the view from the studio window right at this point. There's one of the footings right here. Here's a photograph that I found in the Arizona Memories Project of John Wayne's soundstage, which was built in 1946. At the same time, Max and Dorothea were building their home. And the aerial photograph actually shows Capricorn Hill with the house and the studio and something unknown in the woods I'm about to take you to. Watch your shins there, because I've stabbed myself more than once doing this little walk. And we're actually walking on a path that Max used to walk every day between the house and the studio, and what I'm about to show you. Watch out for that. And here's something unknown that Max built. This was actually how he solved water. He built an octagon, and Max was kind of obsessed with the number 8, so I measured each wall, and each wall was 8 feet by 8 feet. And it stored about 18,000 gallons of water. And much like the house, I believe he considered the house an art object because he embedded all the walls with art. He signed this as if it were an art object right here in order to store water, many years before there was any water available in Sedona. This is the pathway that Max would walk every day between his studio and the house and the cistern. And a few years ago, there were actually Max Ernst bird baths in the forest back here. According to people who saw the property in the 50s and 60s, they said the yard was full of artifacts, and we still find them. Just in December, we found a signed Max Ernst rock carving just in a pile of rocks right over here where Capricorn was. And he embedded the walls of the house with art. And some of them are removed and some of them remain. So it's a bit of an archaeology project to determine how many of them are still left. Here's a photograph of a row of them right above this window when Tanguy came to visit in 1951 and Max was building this wall out of cement. Here's a famous photograph of Max and Dorothea playing chess just inside that window looking out to the garden here. Here's another row of art that Max embedded in the walls of the house. And this is a photograph of Max building the den in 1952, which was the final add-on to the property, with 10-foot ceilings because he wanted to have his 10-foot totem inside. This is currently on exhibition at the Louvre in Paris. Max and Dorothea sold the house to Max's son Jimmy Ernst in 1959, and Jimmy removed many of the sculptures from the walls of the house, but he also left sculptures, and here are a few of the sculptures that remain visible that were not covered over by stucco from a later owner. Come on inside and we'll continue the tour inside the home. This appears to be the original door, which was in Dorothea's painting in 1947, Max in a Blue Boat, her portrait of Max. This home is in many books. And in fact, here's a photograph of the window from Dorothea's studio in this book titled Deep Paintings of Max Ernst. And it covers in great detail the Sedona years. And here's a painting Dorothea did of Max in a blue boat, but it also shows the front door and the tarp that used to hang over the door. See, this is an interesting little spot. A lot of people like this part of the story, but obviously a lot of world famous artists came to visit Max and Dorothea in Sedona when there was really nobody here. Many people don't know the story of a very famous artist that lived in Sedona in the 1940s, moved here the same year Max and Dorothea did, and he wrote about Max and the parties he would come to in this house in that period of time. But he also traveled down the Grand Canyon with Max and Dorothea, but the artist for Batman used to come and party at Capricorn Hill and wrote about, his friendship with them in his biography and the parties that he came to here. Okay, now we're in Dorothea Tanning's studio. So there were a lot of famous paintings painted here. And this is the area where her easel would sit, turned toward Oak Creek Canyon. So she would be painting with light from the northern view. And through her catalogs of her work, you'll just find many important paintings that were painted here in the 1940s and 50s, which are in museums around the world. Lee Miller photographed their life here extensively, and here's a famous photograph of Lee Miller and Max Ernst right in the spot where I'm sitting, actually, with her easel here and the same window looking out to the canyon. Man Ray was a very close friend of Max's, and in fact, Man Ray currently holds the auction record for the most expensive photograph ever sold at $12.4 million. Max and Man Ray got married in a double wedding with Dorothea and Juliet Browner in Hollywood, hopped in the car and came to Sedona. And so here's the house in the first phase on a snowy day with Dorothea and Juliet, Man Ray's wife, sitting on the bumper out here in the driveway. This is the final room that Max built on the property, and I have a photograph of Max building this room right here, where you see the steps that we're looking at, and the wall here that was ultimately finished, and the tall height so that his 10-foot tall totem could be displayed right here on the property. Over here is the article that came out in 1952 in Life magazine, and it featured the famous photograph of Capricorn in the backyard by the gardens, as well as Max embedding the walls of the home with artwork, and the production of his small microbe paintings, of which I have a few examples on display right here. Here's a recent discovery from the backyard by the gardens, a small rock carving, which is a bird's head. You can see how it's carved in this way for the beak, and there's an eye here. And Max's alter ego was a bird. And so what was kind of a nice discovery about this was he actually signed it. So there is the M. You twist it a little bit and you see how he signed with the A. And you twist it again and you see the X. So he made the signature a riddle, and that was sitting in the backyard for 70 years. As far as Capricorn itself, there are 4 major fragments which are about to be featured in a new $500 million museum in Berlin. The rest of Capricorn, these are the fragments that are the known fragments of Capricorn that'll be featured in this new museum in Berlin. But the rest of it stayed here, and nobody really knows what happened to it. So I've been digging, and I've been finding pieces of what I believe are the original sculpture, like that large piece right there. And I have a smaller piece over here that I just simply dug up in the yard. And it has a lot of the scoring and features you see carved into the front surface of Capricorn. But Max left me a little present on this one, so that's Max's footprint. This flooring that we're standing on right now was actually the original outside porch. And I have photographs of William Copley coming to visit, standing on this as the outside porch before Max had enclosed it with this room and then built that out-on room and that out-on room later in 1952. This is an important part of the house in the entry foyer here, where the chessboard is set up in the same position that Max and Dorothea would play chess 3 times a week. And not only Max and Dorothea, but their world famous artist friends would come, sit here, and play chess. Marcel Duchamp came in 1945, stayed for a week. Dorothea said he was a wonderful fellow, but it was a little depressing getting beaten at chess all the time. In this room, I sort of call this the Max and Friends room. We have artwork by many of Max and Dorothea's friends. This is an artwork by Leonore Carrington, who is now a world famous artist. Her last auction record in May of last year was $28.5 million for a painting. Here are a couple of etchings by Dorothea Tanning, a small one by Max Ernst, a large one by Leonore Feeney. There are more artists over on these walls. This is an original by Lillian Wilhelm Smith, who was the illustrator for Zane Grey. She was the woman who first rented cabins to Max and Dorothea when they came in 1943 to visit for the first time and to paint paintings. Many people don't know. First of all, Jimmy Ernst bought the home, and he owned it from 1959 to 1965. And he was the one who took a few fragments off of Capricorn, which will be in the Museum of Berlin. But this is the Jimmy Ernst family sitting on Capricorn in 1961 with Dallas Ernst and then Max's granddaughter Amy Ernst and Eric. Many people don't know Jimmy Ernst was one of the founders of the New York School and the Abstract Expressionist movement. Here's a photograph of Jimmy Ernst sitting next to Jackson Pollock. This is an original handwritten letter by Dorothea Tanning, which I was able to acquire actually from a dealer in Paris. But the reason I was interested in it is the date, first of all, is February 1946. And she's writing to a publisher about a story she wants to get published, but she's letting him know after March 15th, you can write me in Sedona, Arizona. I met the fellow who stuccoed the house many years later after it had been sold to someone outside of the family. And he just made a comment, "Oh, I stuccoed over all that Max Ernst artwork." And so we've wondered for years, what might be hiding behind some of the unusual swells in the stucco, like this section right here above the window. We haven't had the stucco removed. We don't know what's behind it, but there's certainly a possibility if Dave Blauert was telling me the truth, that he stuccoed over a lot of Max Ernst's artwork, that there might be more reliefs hidden beneath the stucco. So the question is there anything behind those hollow sounds?